It all begins when the MC's father arranges a marriage for him with Archduke Valdrova. His father firmly states he is certain the young man knows very well what that decision means. For Ferda Raznova, receiving the news of that engagement to the Archduke felt like a terrible nightmare. For the MC to react this way, the woman must be incredibly plain. For any noble, those words were the equivalent of receiving a final sentence, leaving only two choices. He could refuse the marriage and be cast out, or accept the agreement and end up completely ruined, but deep down, he truly just wanted to feel like part of that family and be accepted by them. The servants constantly mocked him for training without any talent, calling the young man sickly and pathetic. Absolutely no one took Ferda's side, but he endured all that scorn and silence. Even with everything against him, the young man kept pushing forward and trying to give his best every single day. He always looked toward his father, hoping to see any sign of pride or recognition. In the end, his greatest desire was simply to be acknowledged and valued by his own family, until one of his brothers shows up to mock him, asking if he had lost his mind by starting to train. Ferda ended up defeated and humiliated on the ground, being told he never had the right to try to be a knight. To make matters worse, he was even called a filthy outcast. All he wanted was to be accepted by the family, but looking out the window, he saw that reality was completely different. His father simply turned his back and walked away from the window, showing that he did not care about him at all. At that moment, Ferda realized that everyone there had turned their backs on him a long time ago. Back in the office, the young man gathers his courage and informs his father that he has decided to leave the family for good. His father merely stares at him with a completely cold look, showing no reaction or affection whatsoever. The man coldly agrees, and soon Ferda finds himself outside the mansion gates in the middle of the night. His father even cruelly warns him that from that moment on, he is no longer a part of the Rosnova family. Ferda begins to tremble with anger, remembering that his father knew perfectly well how hard he was working. Consumed by an uncontrollable rage, his eyes gleam with a terrifying thirst for payback. He swears to himself that never, under any circumstances, would he forgive his father for what he did. At that moment, a mysterious red magic circle appears around him. Reacting to all those intense emotions, he promises to make his father regret casting him aside, awakening as a mage that very same day Ferda had just awakened his magical powers at only 18 years of age. However, other apprentices mock him while he is on the ground, saying he was far too old to want to be a mage. They laugh, asking if he even has the brains to understand magic. Since everyone uses internal energy as a foundation, Ferda ignores the jokes and unleashes an absurd amount of mana that leaves the boys absolutely terrified. A red circle appears, and he reveals that his mana is fueled purely by his hatred and desire for payback. With all that dark energy built up, the young man causes a massive explosion on the spot. Ferda realizes that the more he dislikes someone, the stronger his magical power becomes. After reaching the sixth circle of magic with his hatred, his only remaining task was to return to the Rosnova mansion. He used his new powers to make the servants who used to humiliate him destroy themselves without mercy. After that, Ferda made his two older brothers despise each other deeply. He watched closely as the two fought until they completely ruined each other on the ground. Finally, he confronts his own father, the man he hated the most. Who desperately begs for an end to his misery, Ferda tells his father to take a good look at the ruin of the proud Rosnova family that he himself had built. The man completely loses his mind upon seeing that absolute nightmare unfold before his eyes. With that, absolutely everything connected to the Rosnova family vanished from the world. However, that accomplished payback still did not seem to be enough to settle his heart. Several influential and powerful people joined together with their swords to try to stop him at all costs. They surround him and declare him the greatest public enemy of the entire continent, promising to bring him to justice. But he survives once again and reaches the 8th magic circle, the highest level a human can possibly achieve. Ferda becomes an archmage, knowing that people still despise him and will come after him for payback one day. Because of this, he needs to reach the 9th circle, the realm of a demigod, to obtain absolute power. Researching through ancient books, he finally finds the final ingredient necessary to get there. Upon seeing the page of the book, he wonders if that was just a cruel joke from fate itself. The last ingredient he needs so badly is the heart of the red dragon, Archduke Valdrova. The dragon speaks about how fate truly loves to play tricks and be extremely ironic. She finds it unbelievable that the very person she was supposed to marry in the past would be the exact one to show up now, attempting to take her life right then and there. Ferda spits blood and grits his teeth, visibly worn out from all the combat. Furious, the young man tells the tyrant Valdrova to just accept her end and finish it already. The dragoness says she knows people call her a tyrant, but asks the reason for so much hatred. She explains that she has always lived isolated from everyone and never understood why humans resented her. Ferda counters furiously, questioning if she truly believed she did nothing wrong to him. He screams that her obsession with finding a groom was what caused him to be cast out of his own family. The creature asks in confusion if that is truly her fault, and he confirms it with absolute certainty. The young man complains that the greed of a wild dragon desiring a human partner ended up ruining his life. Hearing the whole explanation, the creature merely says that she finally understands what happened. Facing that calm response, Ferda becomes suspicious, not understanding what just happened. But he decides to ignore it, as the pause gave him just enough time to gather his mana. The dragon then prepares to strike and lunges with her claw toward the MC. Startled, Ferda tries to defend himself using his magic barrier. A devastating strike lands, and blood begins to trickle down the MC's face. But to his surprise, it was the blood of the dragon who begins to tear open her own chest with her claws. Ferda is completely horrified and confused, not understanding why she is harming herself like this. She then asks if his magic truly required a dragon's heart to work. Desperate, he realizes she wants to destroy her own chest, and yells for her to stop immediately. Little by little, she begins to open her chest. Ferda races against time to stop her, because that heart is his only chance to evolve his magic. He fires a spell to try to stop her. The attack hits dead center, and the immense dragon begins to stagger backward from the blow. Ferda screams in panic, as he sees her claws continuing to squeeze her chest area. When the dragon collapses, the young man wonders in desperation what could have happened to the valuable heart. He focuses his vision, and notices the reflection of an intense golden glow in his own eyes. To Ferda's relief, the precious dragon heart remains perfectly intact before him. The creature calmly tells him to take the heart, leaving the young man confused by her action. He questions why she would do that, since she could have simply tried to defeat him in combat. She reveals she did it only because she realized that her very existence brought suffering to him. Poor dragoness, I actually felt really sorry for her. The dragon begins to recall her entire lonely and painful past in the deep depths. Valdrova confesses that she always hated herself, and the violent blood that ran through her veins. She deeply detested the uncontrollable urge to cause destruction for no reason at all. That monstrous and uncontrolled version of herself was something she could not bear to face. In the past, whenever she took her human form, her presence caused fear and chaos wherever she went. She knew very well that her mere existence was enough to terrify the people around her. She regrets having dreamed of happiness, knowing that her foolish wish ended up making many suffer. A sincere tear begins to fall from the immense eye of the defeated dragon in the midst of the darkness. Since everyone suffered because of her, she hopes he can find happiness through her sacrifice. With that, the gigantic creature finally fades away and falls lifeless onto the dark ground. Ferda feels a strange tightness in his chest and wonders what kind of feeling that was. The young man becomes quite irritated that such a desired victory is leaving such a bitter taste. He screams in frustration that the dragon tried to mess with his head until her very last breath. Ferda tries to focus on his main goal, remembering that the ninth circle is right in front of him. He then raises the glowing dragon heart to finally obtain all absolute power. Ferda thinks that if he can absorb all of it at once, he will finally be able to surpass the limits of humanity itself and will manage to be reborn in this world as a powerful and feared demigod. A gigantic explosion of light and dust violently consumes the entire area. Suddenly, the scenery changes completely and he finds himself floating bare in an immense dark void. Ferda wonders what is happening there since he had consumed the dragon heart perfectly. But the young man's sensation at the moment is like sinking deeper and deeper into an endless swamp. He begins to question if that endless fall is just a side effect of the absorption. At that instant, an overwhelming and uncontrollable wave of someone else's feelings invades his mind. A strong bolt of magical electricity strikes the young man's head directly in the middle of the darkness. With that, Ferda realizes in shock that those memories and feelings actually belong to Valdrova. He finally manages to see the truth and understand what was going through that creature's mind. He sees an ancient and deep despair that makes his own seem insignificant, but also a very gentle loneliness. Ferda realizes that all the anger and hatred that fueled his journey to take her life were painfully small, and he wonders in tears what it was that he had just done. The young man questions what he truly wanted so badly. To become an archmage, get payback, or become a demigod. At that moment, he remembers when he was just a small child drawing alone at a table. He realizes that the answer to that question was always an absolute no. He only wanted to draw his own family united on a piece of paper and be accepted by them. His true and only desire was to manage to build a simple family and live in peace. Remembering Valdrova's human form, he wonders if she shared the exact same simple dream as his with great sadness. The mage realizes that his entire pursuit of power and payback made absolutely no sense. The dragoness was already gone by his own hands, making his grand achievement completely empty. Sincere tears filled with regret begin to roll down the young mage's face. He remembers that the only magic a ninth circle mage can cast is the wish spell. Even thinking that everything is in vain, Ferda decides to cast the ultimate magic in the middle of that glowing circle. Suddenly, the young man hears a familiar voice calling his name and opens his eyes in surprise. Looking around, he realizes he is back in the luxurious office of his family's mansion. Before him stands his father, Irembalt Rosnova, scolding him for being distracted while the two were talking. Ferda remembers that this man had lost his mind before passing away and begins to suspect exactly what day this might be. His father repeats the exact phrase, saying that his arranged marriage to Archduke Valdrova has already been decided. The man goes on to say he is certain the young man knows very well what that decision means. His father begins to warn that if he chooses to refuse the engagement to the Archduke, the Rosnova family will take action. Ferda takes a step forward and realizes, completely shocked, that he actually managed to travel back in time. He interrupts the man resolutely and says with great firmness that he understands all of it perfectly. Ferda swears he will not run away this time and formally announces that he accepts the engagement to Archduke Valdrova. The second son of the family, Hyukin Rosnova, is extremely shocked to hear that his brother accepted the engagement. Hyukin asks the servant if he heard correctly because his brother is not the type to willingly walk toward his own ruin. The butler explains that Ferda is due to leave soon, but he dismissed all the servants and locked himself in his own room. Hyukin smiles wickedly and decides to pay a visit to mock his younger brother's desperate face. Inside his private quarters, Ferda walks calmly from one side to the other. Suddenly, Hyukin kicks the door open, shouting and asking angrily why he hasn't left yet. But looking into the room, the older brother gets a look of absolute astonishment and surprise. He is shocked to see the youngest calmly getting dressed, since he was certain he would find him crying in fear. Ferda looks at him calmly and questions his brother's lack of manners for invading the room without knocking, seeing Hyukin surprised that he is dressing himself. Ferda explains that he dismissed the servants to get used to not having help. Hyukin is suspicious of that drastic change and asks if he truly understands the meaning of the engagement. Ferda replies with absolute calmness that he knows very well. It basically means being expelled from the family. Hyukin laughs nervously and says that in reality, he is going to ruin himself, asking if he knows why the position of groom is always vacant. With an extremely cold and determined expression, Ferda simply responds back that he is perfectly aware of everything. In the past, Valdrova's first groom was the third prince of the empire. He was the perfect man due to his intelligence and beauty, even refusing the throne to apply for the engagement. However, just one day after arriving at the territory for the engagement to the dragon, the man appeared in a wretched state with his eyes completely paralyzed. He had been violently beaten to the point of being on the brink of destruction on the ground. Hyukin points at Ferda and asks if he truly thinks he will survive something that even the prince couldn't handle. Right after, he shrugs, saying he won't stop a fool who wants to walk straight into the dragon's jaws. But his brother threatens him, warning him not to even think about running away, or he himself would take Ferda's head before Valdrova could. Ferda looks at him with disdain and says dryly that his older brother should learn to control himself better. He throws it in Hyukin's face that everyone already knows about the looks he keeps giving their oldest brother's wife. The brother tries to lunge at him with hatred, but Ferda mockingly warns that he will have to hold back his urge to strike. He smiles and comments that his face is far too valuable right now for him to allow any kind of bruising. Saying that the journey to the dragon's territory will be long, Ferda calmly says goodbye and heads to the carriage. The old middle-aged butler begins to cry heavily into a handkerchief during the young man's departure. The servant says through tears that it was an absolute honor to serve the young master during all these years. Ferda knows that is a lie, because if it were a true honor, he wouldn't have poisoned his food before he remembers that in his childhood, he thought he was naturally frail, not knowing that not even the servants were on his side. Just remembering that dark time, the young man feels a deep disgust and a strong urge to wring the butler's neck. However, he merely places his hand on the servant's shoulder and thanks him for his hard work for so long. He comments cynically that it must not have been easy to put up with him for years. Leaving the butler tense at the comment, Ferda asks the servant to take good care of his old family in his absence and finally gets into the carriage sitting inside. He notices that his mind is at peace, perhaps because he already got his payback on everyone in another life. He rests his head and silently observes all the beautiful nature passing outside the window. Ferda feels that all that uncontrollable fury and insatiable thirst for payback have vanished from his chest for good. The young man reflects that the red magic based on hatred he used to use acted very much like a substance. In the beginning, it was something very exciting, but as his body built up a tolerance, the power spun out of his control. That dark force had become a true toxin to his mind and his very soul. When the madness took over his body, everything around him seemed extremely thrilling and euphoric. But now, Ferda knows very well that he no longer wants to live in such a destructive and empty way as before. For him, experiencing this feeling of peace and quiet after so much time was proving to be something very pleasant. Suddenly, the journey comes to an end, and the coachman calls out in a very frightened tone that they have finally arrived. A wooden sign in the middle of the woods warns that the Duke's territory begins there and that entry is strictly forbidden. The young man steps down from the vehicle and calmly sits on top of his travel suitcase to wait. The coachman leaves in a hurry, shouting from a distance that he hopes the young master manages to stay safe and healthy. He thinks it is good not to be watched, but figures he will need to use simple fourth circle spells if any wild beasts appear. At that moment, the wind blows more intensely and brings some leaves, immediately catching the young man's attention. Ferda focuses his attention on the forest and notices the mysterious silhouette of a girl hidden among the plants. The young woman in a maid uniform approaches and formally introduces herself as Ruri, loyal servant to Valdrova. She asks if he is the young Ferda Rosnova, and the young man calmly confirms his own identity. Ruri makes a gesture with her hand, indicating that she will accompany him and guide him on the path toward the castle. The residents of the Archon Empire prided themselves on their supposed absolute power, ignoring the flaws of their own nation. On the far east of the continent lay the dangerous land of demons, a place filled with monsters impossible to tame. However, it was the terrible red dragon Valdrova who managed to halt the advance of the beasts and control the entire border. Ferda thinks it is unfair that she has such a bad reputation, since she built the only line of defense for that dangerous place. While wolves surround them in the woods, he remembers that people constantly made up slanders that she was raising an army of beasts. However, all those cowardly liars wouldn't have the slightest courage to say anything in front of the immense dragon. Noticing the young man's concern about the monsters around them, Ruri turns and tells him not to be worried. She uses a light protective or healing magic and guarantees that the beasts will not attack them recklessly while he is by her side. He asks how much walking time is left, and she says it will take 2 hours, which makes him question how she got there so fast. With complete naturalness, Ruri shares that if she were traveling alone and decided to fly, the trip would take only 10 seconds. Ferda realizes that, exactly as he suspected, she is no ordinary maid. Ruri is a high-level dragon spawn with innate physical strength and magic, concealing her horns and tail from humans. Knowing this, the young man plants his wooden staff firmly into the ground in a very determined manner. He suggests flying to the lair, but she counters by asking if she would have to carry him in her arms the entire way. The young man says he can handle the flight without any problems, but Ruri responds directly that she simply does not want to carry him. The two end up in absolute silence in the middle of the path through the dense forest. He suggests resting for a bit, but she tells him to keep walking because her master is already waiting for his arrival. Ferda makes a face of discouragement, realizing he will have to endure the entire walk through the exhaustion. The young man reflects to himself on how the path to getting married truly is never a simple task. After walking a great deal, the maid finally knocks on the enormous door of the territory's castle. She announces loudly to her master that his groom has finally just arrived at the location. Ferda feels an absurd pressure coming from inside and is astonished by the immense presence of the dragon. Ruri tells him to wait there while she goes inside to get the message, but the young man suggests speaking face to face. The servant glares at him with fury, asking if someone of his standing thinks they have the right to see the Duke in person. Shortly after, she returns outside, announcing that she will deliver the official message from Duke Valdrova. The maid congratulates the young man on behalf of her master for coming so far, even knowing their severity. However, she soon warns that the Duke has not the slightest desire or interest in carrying out a forced engagement. Hearing the order to leave, Ferda is surprised to be sent back after the entire journey. He thinks that if it were in his past life, he would have accepted the offer to leave that very instant. However, he is now a very different person, and being here at the castle today is entirely his own choice. Ferda firmly declares that he has no intention of turning back and very much wishes to proceed with the engagement. The young man asks if she won't deliver his response to her master, making the servant accept reluctantly. Right after, Ruri reappears tightly holding a very large and heavy sack full of gold coins. She places the sack on the ground, saying the Duke praises his courage and offers that wealth should he need it. The servant explains that the money is so he can leave that place and rebuild his life somewhere else. But Ferda looks at all that fortune and states that he has not the slightest interest in power or wealth. The young man extends his hand calmly and begins to reveal what his true desire there is. He declares with determination that his only interest is to fulfill the engagement to Duke Valdrova. Hearing all that persistence from the young man, Ruri closes her eyes and lets out a deep sigh of anger. Suddenly, gripped by a sudden rage, she clenches her fist tightly and delivers a strike into the air. She points her finger at Ferda and harshly demands that he leave that place once and for all. Ferda comments that the response was far too short to be from the Duke, and she confesses that those words are her own horns appear on her head, and her nails grow like sharp claws as she makes a direct threat. Ruri unleashes her entire monstrous green magical aura, finally revealing her immense reptilian tail. The young man tries to shield himself against the terrible gale, realizing that it is the terrifying dragon Fear. She throws him to the ground and rants that she knows well that mortals like him are just garbage consumed by ambition. Fallen, Ferda finally understands that it was exactly because of all that arrogance that the third prince ended up ruined. Ruri confirms this and says the prince only wanted to exploit the marriage to be able to subjugate and dominate the dragon. She complains that he was just a shameless fool thinking he could hide that obvious greed. The maid takes a firm step forward, agreeing that the former groom was indeed an extremely arrogant man. Ruri pins him against the ground with her claws on his chest, saying she sees no difference between the two. She asks crossly if he truly wishes to have the same tragic and painful fate that the prince had. However, even being in a dangerous situation, Ferda merely gives her a slight confident smile. Ruri is surprised when the young man begins to make a sincere oath, swearing that there is no lie in his words. He guarantees he did not come forced by anyone and that he is also not after profit or personal advantages. He remembers that in his other life, the dragon gave her own heart to save a selfish man like him. Ferda promises that this time he will stand firmly by her side, loudly declaring that he came to be her groom. He says that since they will be married, she herself should speak directly to him instead of using a maid. The servant's fist trembles with rage, finding the young man's boldness to be completely insolent. She lunges at him with her claws ready, furiously yelling for him to stop talking that nonsense. Suddenly, Ruri freezes in midair right in front of Ferda, pulling back her claw strike. She steps away reluctantly and asks to be excused for a moment, receiving Ferda's calm agreement. Inside the castle, the maid faithfully relays to her master the bold words spoken by the young man. She makes a respectful bow on the floor and concludes that was exactly what the young man declared. Ruri bows on her knees before the immense silhouette of the dragon, who holds absolute power in that territory. Grand Duchess Valdrova, in her beautiful human form, asks in surprise if the young man truly said all of that. Curious about the audacity, the red-haired duchess confesses that she wishes to find out what kind of person he really is. This dragoness is gorgeous and the MC is rejecting her. If he doesn't want her, I do. Ruri shares that he is incredibly weak, looking like he was going to drop from exhaustion just from the walk to the castle. The maid says with disdain that he is awful and suggests throwing him out right away, but receives a stern look from her master. Ruri apologizes awkwardly and confesses that the young man is actually quite handsome, but the Duchess says that was not her question. Letting out a long sigh of defeat, the maid admits that the young man truly does not seem to be an ordinary human. She explains seriously that, being a dragon spawn, it is extremely easy for her to terrify any mere mortal. However, the servant reports that Ferda did not show the slightest sign of fear, even after she unleashed her entire terrifying aura. If she did that to me, I'd actually enjoy it. Because of this, she believes the young man will be perfectly capable of looking directly into the eyes of the Duchess herself. Suddenly, Valdrova lets out a light and mysterious chuckle that takes the maid completely by surprise. The Duchess comments with a satisfied smile that she finds that attitude from the young man very good. She is very pleased to know that there is finally a human capable of holding her direct gaze. She rejoices upon realizing that they will finally be able to converse and face each other in a completely normal way. Ruri repeats the word quite astonished, finding her master's desire to want to act normally very strange. The Duchess confirms affectionately, while the servant merely accepts the orders in absolute silence. Ruri returns outside and informs Ferda that her lady has indeed decided to move forward with their engagement. Next, she states that she will guide him and show the way to the guest room where he will be staying. Stepping into the luxurious room, Ferda notices in surprise that the place is much cleaner and better maintained than he imagined. He asks who takes care of the cleaning there, and she proudly shares that she is the only person in the castle besides the dragon. She states harshly that she is her master's only servant, coldly calling the young man a guest. Ferda finds it strange to be called that, but she counters saying that since the marriage hasn't occurred, he is just a guest. He compares her to a protective watchdog and decides to ask when the engagement ceremony will finally be held. Ruri explains that the event will be simple and low-key, taking place in 1 month inside the dragon's lair itself. Ferda listens to all the maid's explanations with attention and simply agrees calmly to the details of the event. The young man becomes quite thoughtful as he reflects on having a 1-month deadline until the official set date of the marriage. The maid glares at him with her arms crossed, maintaining her completely suspicious and watchful posture over him. She warns him that no one is going to hand him anything on a silver platter and that this deadline will serve for him to prove his true worth. Ruri points her finger and demands that he manage to obtain a status worthy of being the partner of such a grand being in 30 days. The young man is surprised by the demand upon hearing that he will need to prove he has the qualifications to be her groom. Ferda makes a face and thinks to himself that managing to get married is certainly proving to be a very complicated task. He asks if that demand is a wish of the Duchess, but Ruri confesses that it was her own personal decision. She explains that her master is very naive and forgives everything, but that she herself doesn't accept just anyone living inside there. Ruri demands that even having a weak body, Ferda must manage to show in a practical way that he possesses true potential. She warns that if he fails the challenge, he will never truly be recognized as a worthy companion to the dragon. The young man closes his eyes and murmurs quite thoughtfully before that entire grand challenge imposed by the servant. Ferda focuses the gaze of his blue eyes and thinks with satisfaction that his future bride has excellent allies by her side. He admires the servant's loyalty, putting her master's safety first and demanding the best from her suitor. But at the same time, he questions bitterly why these so loyal allies were not there at the final hour of his other life. He accepts the challenge and asks ironically if he needs to go as far as becoming emperor, but she replies that it's enough not to be looked down upon. He finds amusement in how simple it sounds, since in reality, the demand means showing potential that surpasses even an emperor with a slight and confident smile on his face. The young man accepts all her terms and says he understood perfectly. Ruri glares at him quite irritated, not understanding why the human is so calm and relaxed in the face of danger. She asks angrily if he thinks dragons are easy or if he has mental issues, but he calmly denies it. Ferda asks her not to worry, guaranteeing that he will show his true capacity in just 1 month. Ruri observes him suspiciously, wondering where all that immense confidence the human displayed was coming from. Night falls over the Grand Duchess's immense castle with the full moon shining in the dark sky. Ferda walks through his room, thinking that he truly needs to prove his potential, since at the moment he possesses no magical abilities. He remembers that mages are rare and that he is the only one to have the experience of reaching the 9th circle, which makes recovering everything possible if he can capture that feeling again. For a mage, The first circle is the most important step, as it defines the direction of all their mana circuits. The blue circle is created through calm and stable meditation, being the path chosen by the vast majority of mages. On the other hand, the red circle is born from turbulent emotions and hatred, a dangerous path that nearly drove him mad when he was an archmage in the past. He knows that following the same path as before would make him strong much faster, but he hesitates over that choice. This time, Ferda decides to go down a different route to ensure he will not falter on his new journey. 1 week passes at the castle under the clear daytime sky. Ferda sits on the floor of his room in a lotus position to try to meditate. He concentrates deeply and begins to manifest a small, bluish magical energy between his hands. With a tired sigh, he sees the energy dissipate and realizes he has failed once again in his attempt. He reflects that creating a blue circle takes about 3 years, but he thought he could do it quickly due to having his memories from before rewinding time. Knowing that only 3 weeks remain, Ferda is interrupted by Ruri, who enters the room asking if he is preparing himself. He confirms that he is trying to prepare. But the servant notices the food and grumbles that nothing has changed about him so far. Ferda eats calmly and says things will work out if he keeps trying, leaving the girl silent and irritated. While finishing his meal, the young man admits to himself that he has made no progress and needs a different approach. Suddenly, a very strong tremor shakes the entire room, taking the young man completely by surprise. Ferda asks what that vibration is, and Ruri explains that her master is hunting monsters at this very moment. The young man finds the hunt strange, but the servant shares that the Duchess is personally eliminating the creatures coming from the east. Faced with this, Ferda looks thoughtfully toward the window and murmurs Valdrova's name. He stands up resolutely and informs the maid that he wishes to see that battle with his own eyes. Ruri strongly advises against the idea, causing the young man to question the reason he cannot go there. She explains seriously that the mind of an ordinary human could never bear the sight of such combat. Ruri even mocks him, saying it is better not to watch if he doesn't want to embarrass himself before the engagement ceremony. The young man slams his hand firmly on the table and firmly rejects the advice to stay out of it. Ferda states that seeing the combat is the duty of the one who will be her companion. Insisting on seeing everything up close, faced with his stubbornness, Ruri spreads her dragon wings and flies swiftly through the skies, taking the young man with her. A short time later, they land on a grassy area, and the maid announces that they have finally arrived at the location. Ferda drops to his knees on the ground, feeling sick from the absurd speed of the trip, which felt almost like teleportation. With his stomach turning, he complains about the discomfort, but the servant tells him to focus his attention on the true target. She harshly orders him to stand up and look ahead once and for all. The two observe from the top of a cliff, where a thick dark purple mist covers the region below. Focusing his vision toward the abyss, Ferda's eyes widen, and he is completely shocked by what he sees. He wonders if that dark valley filled with gigantic monsters is the exact location where Valdrova is battling. In the midst of the darkness, the monstrous creatures clash violently in a noisy combat. Suddenly, the immense red dragon emerges flying in the center of a massive explosion of flames. 2 enormous serpents attempt to lunge at the dragon, roaring terrifyingly on the battlefield. But the dragon's powerful claws tear through the skin of one of the monsters without any difficulty. Next, the dragon fiercely bites the creature's neck while flames begin to glow in her mouth. The fiery energy builds up rapidly in the dragon's throat, illuminating the entire area around it. She unleashes a devastating breath of fire that incinerates everything in the path below. The wave of heat and strong wind reaches the top of the cliff, but Ruri remains firm and calm in the face of the impact down below. The dragon lets out an extremely deafening and intimidating roar. The sonic impact of the roar spreads like an overwhelming shockwave throughout the valley. Feeling the crushing pressure of that creature, Ferda begins to break out in a cold sweat and tremble with dread before such power. He collapses to his knees on the ground. Awestruck upon realizing the absurd amount of strength his future bride possesses. The intimidating aura of the dragon's roar deeply affects the mind of any human who hears it up close. Trembling and with his hand on his chest, Ferda tries to breathe while Ruri asks if he finally understood the situation. Ruri coldly states how ridiculous it is for a mere human to dare unite with a being as powerful as a dragon. Ruri points to the immense dragon and says, "That is the true form of the one who will be Ferda's future companion." The servant mockingly repeats how ridiculous it is for a mere human to dare forge a bond with such a powerful dragon. She insists that immense and destructive creature represents exactly the true partner he chose to have by his side. Ruri notices the young man's hand on the ground and realizes he is trembling significantly under all that pressure. She thinks to herself that he is trembling exactly as she expected, justifying why she had warned the young man before. The girl explains that in the blood of a red dragon resides what humans usually call a fierce nature. It is an unyielding existence that cannot live without destroying everything and possesses a fierce intent. Ruri says this fury is innate and asks if he now understands the daily danger of being a dragon's companion. The servant reflects that humans and dragons will never be equals and that her master will soon realize this engagement is a useless dream. However, Ferda raises his head with a smile on his face and murmurs that all of it is truly magnificent, surprising the servant. Ruri is stunned to realize that instead of dread, the young man is looking at the dragon with pure admiration and wonder. She steps back a bit horrified and wonders if the human is actually some kind of crazy glutton for punishment. Night returns to the silent castle while the moon shines calmly in the starry sky. Lying in his bed, Ferda reflects that although he had prepared himself mentally for the pressure, the impact was immense. He feels that his entire body is completely worn out after suffering the direct effects of the dragon's fear and roar. He remembers being carried back by the maid, who also looked quite exhausted from the fast trip. He thinks it is a miracle his mind came out intact and knows he needs to focus so as not to waste the entire day without moving forward. The young man begins to question for what reason he decided to go watch that dangerous combat in the first place, recalling in detail all the impressive scenes he witnessed in the valley during this day. Ferda suddenly has a flash of clarity, and his eyes widen with a great and sudden revelation. Although that sight was terrifying, he realizes that deep down he wishes to continue observing his future bride up close. He reflects that she hides her true form on the eastern border while crushing and tearing apart terrible monsters. He realizes she does all this just to protect tooth and nail the thing she loves most in the world. For Ferda, this determination represents the journey of a noble knight who voluntarily chose a path of suffering. He opens his arms, feeling a light breeze, and thinks about how truly magnificent her attitude is. The young man smiles slightly and reflects on the enormous significance of someone as incredible as her agreeing to be by his side. At that moment, a strong red energy begins to concentrate in his hands, making him realize with a start that it is the red circle. He grows desperate trying to contain the energy because he knows he cannot repeat the same mistakes of the past and needs to reject this power. But looking closer at the flow of that red mana, he is intrigued by what he is seeing inside it. The image of the imposing warrior in red armor resurfaces with full force in his thoughts. Ferda feels his chest pound as he intensely focuses his mind on the striking image of Valdrova. He notices that the more he remembers her battle, the more his circuits clear with a feeling that is not hatred or revenge. Sitting in meditation over the energy, he tries to identify this mysterious emotion before it completely dissipates. The young man concentrates entirely on this feeling, beginning to compress and spin the magical energy rapidly between his hands. He maintains absolute focus while the red mana glows intensely and shapes itself around his body. Ferda channels all his willpower with the goal of manifesting a single powerful magic circle. He manages to create the circle successfully and smiles upon noticing that this time, the energy is completely different from before. With a firm gaze, the young man guarantees to himself that the same mistakes of the past will never happen again in this new life. The next day, Ruri enters the room and her jaw drops as she asks if he truly managed to activate his circuits in a single night. Ferda praises her perception while the maid insists on knowing how he accomplished a feat that would normally be impossible. He brags, saying he managed it because he is no ordinary person, and asks what she thought of his rapid progress. Ruri grudgingly admits that he met the demands, but the young man acknowledges that he still has a long journey ahead of him. He puts away his napkin while maintaining a very serious and focused expression regarding his next steps. Ferda asks if there is a place nearby where he can train, and the scene changes to a field with training targets. One of the straw dummies is set up very quickly in the middle of the sandy terrain. Ruri appears holding a broom and proudly announces that she prepared the entire training area exactly as he had requested. Impressed, Ferda claps and praises the servant's efficiency for putting everything together by herself in just half a day's work. She finds it strange that he asked for simple targets instead of expensive items, and the young man explains that he needs to train the efficient control of his mana. The girl is confused and comments that, for dragons, this concern with energy control seems as simple as practicing breathing. Ferda jokes that others of his race would find that barbaric, but Ruri counters by proudly reminding him that she herself is also a dragon spawn. Ferda stares at her in silence for a moment, keeping a calm and thoughtful expression before her response. He thinks that those born with natural power will never understand human effort, but invites the servant to watch his simple control training. He knows that the foundation of mana control is stability, which is usually the classic path of the blue circle. However, the circle he chose to awaken this time is a red circle, which changes the dynamics entirely. He needs to stir his emotions and control them at the same time, because overcoming this contradiction is what will finally unleash his true power. In the past, it took him an entire year to extract mana from that current of hatred and another year to condense it into a sphere. All that painful effort in his previous life was necessary for him to succeed in recreating his mana projectile. However, with his accumulated experience, he now needs only 2 minutes to create the exact same sphere. Ruri watches everything shocked and wonders how he managed to perfectly control his mana and create a stable sphere on his very first attempt. Ignoring her astonishment, Ferda easily manifests 3 more red projectiles of energy floating around his hand. He points firmly in the direction of the targets and simply gives the command to fire the magic spheres. The projectiles fly at high speed, tearing through the air and leaving a glowing trail of destructive energy along the way. With a loud explosion, the mana blast hits the target dead center and completely destroys it before the servant's surprised eyes. Satisfied, the young man looks at his own hands and comments with a slight smile that he hasn't lost his touch for magic after all. Ruri stares at him in complete silence, analyzing with great seriousness the flawless demonstration of strength she just witnessed later. Ruri meets with Valdrova in a cave and concludes her report regarding Ferda's early awakening as a mage. The Grand Duchess admits she doesn't quite know how impressive that is and asks how the young man actually did in the servant's evaluation. Ruri shares that he was perfect and made no mistakes, which makes her consider him dangerous, sparking her lady's curiosity. She says it's impossible for a human to be so perfect without hiding something, crossly guessing that he might just be a weirdo who likes pain. If she did that to me, I'd like it too. Please do that to me. Valdrova finds amusement in Ruri recognizing a human skill so much, and the servant reluctantly admits that he is indeed surprising. The Duchess tells her not to worry and states she will try to trust the pure intentions the young man displayed toward her. Ruri observes worriedly, bitterly remembering how her beloved master was deeply hurt by humans in the past. She swears to protect her lady's heart from new disappointments and very much wishes to discover what the suitor's real intentions are. With an idea in mind, the servant suggests taking the opportunity to entrust an important task into Ferda's hands. The Duchess smiles, intrigued by the proposal, and asks what exact task the servant has in mind. Sometime later, Ferda appears impeccably dressed in a noble red outfit while his entrance is formally announced. In the great meeting hall, the local nobles gather, surprised by the Grand Duchess's sudden call for that assembly. Some lords complain about the meeting amidst the danger of the monsters, but soon comment on the imminent arrival of her new groom. One of them is shocked to learn that someone actually accepted that insane proposal and asks who the fool could be. The nobles begin to whisper mean gossip, saying he is just a weak young man who doesn't even know how to use a sword, despite his family. Sitting at the head of the table, an elderly leader mocks the situation, saying the young man won't last long and that there is nothing to worry about. The influential Count Ulvera guarantees that the groom will surely end up torn apart by the Duchess herself anyway. At that moment, the massive doors swing wide open with the official announcement of the groom's entry. Maintaining an extremely elegant posture and a calm gaze, Ferda steps into the hall followed closely by the servant Ruri. Before that happened, the young man was reading calmly in the library and asked if he truly needed to meet with the feudal lords. Ruri explained it was necessary and asked if he knew the reason her master carries the imposing title of Grand Duchess. She recalls that it was Valdrova herself who personally eliminated the terrible black dragon Godwin in the past. Due to this great feat, she gained her lands. But since her focus now is hunting monsters, her groom must govern the region in her place. In short, the Duchess handles the external threats while it is up to him to manage all the internal affairs of the territory. He realizes she is testing his leadership ability and accepts the challenge to go present himself before all the lords. Back at the meeting, The young man formally introduces himself as the Grand Duchess's future companion and takes the floor before the council. Showing no hesitation, he glares at everyone coldly and directly asks how they would like to be treated by him. The direct question takes the lords by surprise, making them realize right off the bat that the young man will not be an easy target to dominate. The old count smiles subtly and responds diplomatically that everyone there are lords who serve faithfully under the Duchess's light. He states it is fair to show respect to her future groom, but makes it clear there are certain conditions that need to be discussed. The elderly man throws his authority on the table, reminding everyone present that they had already sworn loyalty to the empire long before the young man was even born. He then cynically suggests that it would be up to the groom to show proper courtesy and respect for their long experience. Ferda listens to everything calmly and harshly, asks if that is their definitive answer on how they want to be treated. He raises his cold and dark gaze, demandingly requiring them to just answer his question directly. Pressured by the young man's aura, the old count gulps and fearfully gives in, accepting that it is the groom's right to speak down to them. Ferda goes on to say that even after the marriage, nothing will change directly, leaving the governance of each territory in the hands of their respective lords. A lord stands up, slamming the table, and shouts infuriated, asking if the young man is implying that they steal from and exploit their own people. With complete irony, Ferda raises his hand and apologizes very cynically, claiming it was just a small slip of his tongue. The irritated man taunts, saying that now he can clearly understand the reason the young man was banished by his own family. He points his finger, saying the young man is just a failed first circle groom. Demanding respect since he is a far superior fourth circle mage, Ferda merely murmurs calmly that a fourth circle mage is reasonable enough, showing no concern over the threat. The opponent becomes completely blind with rage and asks with gritted teeth what exactly the young man just said. He rants that fourth circle mages are treated as authorities and that their rank is defined purely by their great magical ability. Furious at being insulted by someone from the first circle, he begins to gather his magical energy to teach the young man a lesson in manners. Facing the start of the aggression, Ferda extends his hand with complete calmness and says he has an interesting proposal to make to his opponent. He suggests that to test the skills of a mere first circle, the two should hold a duel right there to decide the matter. The scene changes to a duel arena where the nobles comment that the outcome of a fight between a Circle 1 and a Circle 4 is already more than obvious. In silence, Ruri simply observes the situation, while other nobles wonder if the Salos will show mercy to young Ferda during the combat. The wind blows through the immense stone arena as the two opponents take their combat positions right before the entire audience. With his hands in his pockets and a very relaxed posture, Ferda directly asks which spell his opponent intends to use. Thessalos feels offended by the direct question and angrily complains about how extremely rude the young man is for demanding that before the fight he smiles with disdain and mocks, saying the young man must be dying of fear, offering a chance for him to back out immediately right there. Thessalos grandly announces that he will use the powerful fourth circle magic called Magic Explosion to finish him off. The spectators are startled to hear the name of the devastating technique and whisper worriedly if the young man will even manage to leave there alive. Ferda remains unfazed and says he will also reveal his technique, coldly warning that the only spell he knows how to use is the mana shot. The opponent laughs upon hearing about the basic mana shot spell, but the young man responds with absolute confidence that he does not intend to lose by any means. He makes a slight gesture with his fingers and calmly comments that despite everything, he happens to have plenty of knowledge at his disposal. Infuriated by such arrogance coming from a human, Thessalos shouts and begins to concentrate all his destructive magical power. With that, a huge and glowing magic transmutation circle forms beneath his feet, ready to unleash his fatal attack. Ferda notices that his rival is stirring his emotions unsteadily to inflate his power, recognizing him as another wielder of the red circle. Without wasting any more time, Ferda's 3 red projectiles fire at high speed. Crossing the entire distance of the arena, Thessalos widens his eyes in complete shock and dread as he notices the absurd speed with which those attacks are coming in his direction. While controlling the energy with extreme precision, Ferda coldly warns that this confrontation is already completely decided. The beams of red light hit dead center and pierce through his opponent's defensive spell, casting with surgical precision. Thessalos falls into despair upon seeing that his powerful magic is being destroyed before it is even completely cast. He suddenly realizes that the young man's blasts never intended to hit his own body directly. The opponent is shocked to notice that the young man aimed specifically at the weak points of his transmutation circle to shatter it entirely. He is pushed back by the shockwave of the magical break, unable to believe that such a feat came from a Circle 1 mage. In absolute panic, he recognizes that breaking an active circle is an absurdly high-level technique that not even he is capable of performing. The opponent falls with his hand resting on the arena's stone floor, which is trembling and covered by the remains of his undone mana. He collapses to his knees, completely exhausted and shaking, with no strength left to continue the battle after having his magic flow interrupted. Breaking into a cold sweat and breathing with great difficulty, Thessalos incredulously murmurs to himself that he just lost the fight. Ferda approaches the defeated opponent with slow, calm steps and quietly asks if he finally admits defeat. The man raises his gaze filled with tears and stammers, unable to find words in the face of such humiliation. Instead of shouting insults, he movingly reveals that deep down, all he desired most in his life was to manage to become a stronger warrior. He bows his head to the ground and officially admits his total defeat, guaranteeing he would do anything to obtain true power. The nobles whisper, shocked by the defeat of the Circle 4, but Ruri threatens to tear out the eyes of anyone who doubts Ferda's clean victory. Thessalos shakes the young man's hand with immense respect, praising his mastery and celebrating that the military force of the East is in great hands. The man laughs happily upon seeing his value recognized by someone so strong, celebrating that his dismissal from the capital ended up being a great blessing. Ferda finds the mention of the capital strange and asks his name, hearing that the mage is named Thessalos Walcher. Upon hearing his opponent's name, the young archmage has a flash in his memory and thoughtfully murmurs that he finally remembered who he is. With an intense look, Ferda surprisingly reveals to Thessalos that in his other life, he was his great benefactor. The man becomes totally confused by the revelation, but is interrupted when the young man gently touches the middle of his forehead with the tip of his finger. With a serious and focused look, Ferda points his finger and whispers again the command to fire his mana shot spell. Thessalos is hit point blank by the thunderous impact of the magic, being hurled backward by the overwhelming power of Ferda's strike. The nobles watching the duel freeze in terror with their mouths open before the shocking scene. Thessalos falls lifeless and bleeding on the arena floor, while the young man observes him from above with total coldness. He thinks he could not let him live because in the future the man would end up bringing immense sadness to his bride under the absolute silence of the arena. Ferda begins to walk away from the defeated lord's body without showing any remorse. At that moment, all the nobles present can only think of Ferda's name with absolute dread. The feudal lords begin to tremble and whisper, terrified upon realizing the young man just took a noble's life. They comment shocked that the duel had already ended and that the young man committed a cowardly act before they could intervene. However, none of those frightened nobles possesses the necessary courage to take a step forward and challenge the young man. The young man turns to the frightened crowd and ironically asks why they are all so tense and frozen. Ferda says that man deserved it and that leaving him alive would bring suffering to the Duchess. Shocking the old count with the statement, the count questions how the young man can claim that. Since it is the first time he is meeting Thessalos and the other lords, with an enigmatic smile, the young man calmly replies that his bride wishes from the bottom of her heart for humans to live happily. He explains that she fights to protect humans even being a dragon and that Thessalos' actions went against her will. The young man says it is something that would occur in the distant future and therefore he cannot show it now, leaving the nobles totally confused. They think he is a complete madman for ending someone over a future crime, but Ferda warns that he doesn't care about the rest of them. Later, the royal carriage travels at high speed down the dirt road under an orange sky. Inside the vehicle, the young man hunches his body and holds his head in immense pain, letting out a groan of pure suffering. He complains with great dizziness that his mind is spinning and that he is feeling extremely sick at the moment. Ferda reflects that his mana was completely depleted after performing that precise mana shot against his opponent. To make matters worse, he suffers from severe nausea caused by the bumpy ride. Deeply missing the magical cars of the future, Ruri sarcastically comments with a gleam in her eyes that he was brilliant to eliminate the Duchess's most loyal lord on their very first meeting. The young man asks if she is talking about Thessalos, and the servant confirms that despite appearances, he was indeed very loyal to her master. Ferda gets a bit worried learning this and decides to ask if the lord was truly an honest and just man. Ruri explains that he was half honest and half corrupt, which was already the best around there, since the other nobles are a complete disaster. Even so, The young man guarantees that the engagement will proceed normally, because the reason for finishing Thessalos is entirely justifiable. He leans against the seat thoughtfully and closes his eyes to organize his memories regarding that lord's past. Looking at the sack holding the defeated noble's head, Ferda tries to retrieve all the details in his memories. He recalls that at this exact moment, Thessalos should be committing a very grave crime inside his lands. Upon arriving at the deceased lord's castle, the chief butler bows with respect and welcomes the duchess's envoys. The butler informs them that their master is out, but Ferda coldly replies with total naturalness that the lord is actually dead. Without wasting time, Ruri throws the heavy sack directly into the confused butler's arms, telling him to hold on to that for now. She casually orders them to hang the contents of the sack in a highly visible spot on the lord's castle main gates. The butler opens the sack and falls into absolute panic, upon horrifiedly recognizing that the head inside belongs to his late master. Ignoring the servant's desperation, Ferda and Ruri invade Thessalos' luxurious room in search of secret clues. Ruri warns that he needs to find proof of corruption, but Ferda reminds her that she herself helped him by taking the head from the corpse for him. She threatens to take the head back and cancel the engagement, but the young man says he just found a secret passage under the bed. He runs his hands across the wooden floor, searching for some hidden mechanism capable of opening the secret entrance. Seeing the young man taking too long, Ruri approaches authoritatively and tells the young man to step away from there immediately. She positions herself firmly and concentrates all her immense physical strength into her clenched fist. With an overwhelming punch of pure force, she totally destroys the wooden floor, opening a huge hole in the ground. Ruri shakes off the dust and casually warns that the passage is now open and ready for them to enter. The two begin to descend step by step down a dark and cold stone staircase that leads directly to the basement. Ferda and Ruri cover their noses, horrified by the unbearable smell of blood and rot that invades the entire underground environment. They come across a secret laboratory packed with surgical instruments and mangled corpses of humans and monsters mixed together. Located there were Thessalos' experiments, a necromancer follower of the Demon King who used forbidden dark magic. Ferda notices horrified a soldier of the territory chained up and realizes the lord was stitching monster organs onto human bodies. Ruri is overcome by an overwhelming rage upon realizing that Psychopath was practically begging to be finished by them. She angrily concludes that humans are not to be trusted, but admits his betrayal fully justifies the execution of that noble. However, she looks suspiciously at Ferda and asks how he already knew about the existence of a place as secret as that one. Without answering, the young man focuses his bright blue eyes on the papers and triumphantly whispers that he finally found what he wanted. The document reveals Thessalos' secret and nameless masterpiece: the method for infinite mana cultivation. Thessalos explains in the notes that monsters produce mana infinitely and constantly inside their bodies. However, it is an impure and dark energy that normally cannot be utilized for anything useful. But if they manage to artificially replicate that biological capacity to generate continuous mana, it would be possible to extract pure mana infinitely, completely surpassing all limits imposed by magic circles. Thessalos laughed wickedly, planning to use an army of the undead to destroy the nobles who banished him to the dragon's lands. The necromancer celebrated that he would soon become an archmage, while the young Ferda of the past confronted him in silence. Ferda intended to use that same valuable technique to realize his own revenge in the past. In the end, the secret mana cultivation technique ended up falling into his hands in this life too, exactly as happened before. He knows that studying this method would make him reach the 8th circle much faster, but he hesitates thoughtfully. Ruri comments that he is quite ambitious like any human and says no one would know should he decide to steal the documents. She ironically congratulates the young man on finding a golden opportunity to obtain the power that humans desire so much, but completely surprising the maid. Ferda holds out the manuscript and firmly refuses the idea of keeping it. The young man places the sheets into her hands and coldly orders her to destroy absolutely everything in the laboratory. Ruri is in shock and asks if he is serious, unable to understand how a mage wouldn't covet such knowledge. He admits the research could revolutionize the world of magic, but questions what good all of that would be. In the end, Ferda prefers to destroy the technique by its roots rather than let himself be seduced by power and end up bringing sadness to the Grand Duchess in the future. He looks into her eyes and firmly asks if she can burn all those forbidden documents for him. Ruri stares at him in silence for a brief moment and decisively responds that the request will not be difficult at all for her to fulfill. Swiftly, intense blue flames begin to sprout from her hand, consuming the forbidden paper immediately. The blue dragon fire spreads furiously throughout the entire place, incinerating every piece of research and the mutilated bodies. He knows that magic carries the essence of the one who casts it, and that Thessalos' mana was totally corrupted by his twisted hatred in the past. Thessalos had an inferiority complex and hatred as massive as the ones Ferda himself used to carry inside. If he inherited that dark magic, he would end up being consumed again by uncontrollable feelings, needing to discard it for good.